Good afternoon, everybody. Do we have a live mic in the house? Seems like we do not. Do we have somebody in the tech booth? Seems like we do not. Do we have someone in the tech booth now? Yes! Yes, we do. I love it. Welcome to the Mind the Gap Directors Forum. Big thanks to Netflix, who has stepped into the Mind the Gap space and is our sponsor, one of our sponsors for Mind the Gap this year. So thank you, Netflix. Yes. Yeah. Cue for applause. This panel came about because in 91 years of Academy Awards, there have only ever been 5 women even nominated for Best Director. 5, a handful. Lena Wertmuller, Jane Campion, Catherine Bigelow, Sofia Coppola, and Greta Gerwig. That's it. So we did an amazing panel of people whose work was coming out in, the given year, a few years ago, whose works were seen to be on sort of awards track, and they were all men. Now, it was actually the year that Steve McQueen won for 12 Years a Slave, and he was on the panel. But what is important for me is to have the optic and knowledge and to get it into our DNA that women are directors. So this is a non-hyphenate panel. It's not women directors, it's directors. And it's a great international group of people who all have films that are coming out this year and are all wonderful, brilliant pieces of work that if you haven't seen them yet, you will be seeing and hearing about. And to moderate the panel, we have the equally brilliant Melissa Silverstein of Women in Hollywood. I'd like to welcome Melissa to the stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm a New Yorker. I don't leave my bag anywhere. Okay, so what we're going to do today is bring out these amazing women, and they're going to talk to you for a couple of minutes about their work, their experience, and then we'll get into some questions. So come on down. We have Casey Lemmons. She's the director of Harriet. And next up, it's like a beauty contest. We have Zabu Brightman. And next up, we have Sipi Shada. Next up, we have Chinoe Chokwu and Petra Costa. So Petra has directed a documentary, and the rest are features. One is animated, right here, right?
Yes.
Okay. Got a lot of people to manage here, a lot of movies to talk about. So what I'm going to do is just give you a little sense, a little quick bio about the women, and then I'm going to ask them to talk a little bit about their work. So, Casey, let's just start with you. So we did a panel yesterday, so we're buds.
Yeah.
So Casey's been directing for over 20 years, and her other directorial credits are Caveman's Valentine, Talk to Me, and Black Nativity, and Eve's Bayou, which was recently added to the Library of Congress's National Film Registry. We'll get to that. And that was your debut film. Okay. So I think what I'd like to do is just have you kind of give us a little overview of your work, your career, what's your passions about? I mean, I really want people to get to know you here. We have some time. Usually these things are just so rushed. What are the stories that you're drawn to? Describe your current project, where it's premiere, distribution kind of stuff, because we also want to get a sense of how people's movies get out into the world.
Okay, so it's a little bit of a long story, so I'm not going to make it long. But the interesting things I think are I started as an actor, and I started young as an actor. So my first professional acting job, I was 9 years old. So I've actually been in show business for decades and decades. As my career was going, pretty well, but still I had a lot of just dissatisfaction with the kind of roles I was getting, and I was getting, black girl best friend and, black girl cop and, those kind of things. I had an emptiness that I was filling with writing. And so at that time I was writing, and I started off by writing scenes for friends of mine to do an acting class, kind of little scenes that were contextless in a way, And at that point, which was about the late 80s, I decided to go to film school. And I think the thought was that I was going to go to film school and maybe shoot documentaries. So I studied cinematography, and the first little film I made was a docudrama. And that short film, did well, like at festival, and all of a sudden, I started to think of myself as a hyphenate. Actor, writer, director, it was a question. And then my career started getting a little more exciting, and I did Silence of the Lambs as an actor. And, that was really exciting. So I moved to Hollywood and, become famous.
You're on the phone
Yeah.
with Clarice.
Yeah, exactly. And that was great. And I worked with some really great directors. So as an actor, I worked with some really great directors. I worked with Spike Lee and John Woo. I did his first American film, Hard Target, and Jonathan Demme, who was actually a dear friend of mine. All before I even wrote, or during the process of writing Eve's Bayou. So I wrote Eve's Bayou, my first film. I was not intending to direct it. I was intending to act in it one day. When I got a little older and wiser, I was writing a security role for myself, so that when I no longer felt like auditioning, I could have this fabulous part. So I'd written this part that I thought was my dream part, but that's not what happened. I ended up, through a series of circumstance, I ended up directing it, and that was my first film. So I've made 5 films. I guess the interesting part about that is it's been a very Byzantine journey. Like, I couldn't really have predicted which way it would go. For instance, after my first film, I thought I didn't have to direct again. I mean, that was it. I was going to rest on those laurels and, go back to whatever, acting. Along the way, well, that's not what happened. I did a second film and then a third and a fourth, and now I've done my 5th. And along the way, I became very interested, and I can't remember the first moment that it occurred to me, but I used to make jokes to my husband. I would say, when I'm the most popular professor and I have my Tuesday and Thursday night class, and I would kind of joke about it. Then when I get tired of show business and I'm a popular professor, someplace along the way, I became very interested in teaching, and that became a huge part of my life. And so I'm a professor at NYU Grad Film School, and I've been working with Sundance for 20 years, and very involved in raising the next generation of filmmakers.
Terrific. Zaboo Brightman is the co-director of Swallows of Kabul, and she's from Paris. And you're a longtime screen actor who made your directing debut with Beautiful Memories in 2001, and you won a Best First Work of Fiction César. And so your current film, The Swallows of Kabul, co-directed with, can you tell me, I'm going to not pronounce her name properly, or his name?
Elia Gobi-Mevelek. Yeah, it's quite, even in French, it's quite difficult to pronounce.
And it won't sound really good with my accent. Premiered in Cannes in On Certain Regard. So tell us a little bit about how you're also an actor and how you got into the
it's
writing,
quite similar,
directing.
actually. It's quite similar. I was frustrated as well by certain role, not the same kind of frustration that, of course, you had, but it was quite frustrating. I'm from a family of actors and writers. My dad was a writer. He did a very famous series on TV in the 60s, and he lived for 10 years in Canada. My mom was a French-Canadian actress. And we went back to Paris. Was born actually in France. I actually wanted to be a teacher. I don't know why. I wanted to be a teacher. I didn't want to do like my parents, probably. And then I ended acting because it's the only thing I knew about it, the only thing I knew anyway, from quite a young age. And then I stopped, and then I became an actress, just like this. Not really a big passion about it. I just did that. And then I began to write because I was frustrated because I didn't have any funny, nice parts. And I began to do theater as well, and more theater and cinema. And actually, I found myself just directing. I don't like to play in my movies, not much. I do sometimes. I don't like it because I'm losing time in the makeup thing, and we've got to work, so to do things, and I'm just worried, and the makeup artists get really stressed by me. Because I said, come on, I've got to go. And so it sounds a bit the same. And I love to teach as well, and to work as much in theater than in cinema. And I really like documentary. Actually, the first thing I wrote was a documentary about jokes, the silly jokes or jokes. Who told it to you? It was where does it begin? You know, because it goes far, and you never know where it begins. You know, so and I never shot it actually. Never. It doesn't exist. I don't even know why I'm talking about it. I don't know. It's so not important at all. You know.
And so you...
Sorry. And sorry.
But this one is an animated film. Have you done animated films before?
But no, I didn't. But I was drawing all the time. I loved drawing, and I loved animation. And I thought animation, it was, I did some voices for characters, and I thought it was frustrating to have actors afterwards, after some little, you know, they already have what they call animatic, first drawings, and I thought actors should be first. So I did the whole thing, a different way.
Tell us a little bit about the film.
And well, it's from a book of Yasmina Kadra, and this it was a Nigerian military, and they stopped everything and took the two first name of his wife to write, which I think is great, by the way. And I took this book. Well, it has been given to me as a script, first of all, and so I had to find the drawing, and because I wanted something hyper realistic, emotionally speaking, and acted like it was real, with imperfections and breathing and coughing and everything. I wanted everything to be animated. But then I chose the Eléa Gobé-Mévélec, the woman with the difficult name to pronounce. And I chose her because she did something very beautiful. It's a watercolor. It's like a painting, really. So both things together actually work well. And what she's doing is something visually interesting, because you're a bit far from realistic. It's a bit far, so it makes a distance, which is interesting because the subject is so dramatic. So it's such a tragedy. So I think it was quite good, and it's what she's doing is really beautiful, but it's a very traditional thing. So it's very, very long. It's 2 seconds a day animating, you know. So it's very, very long. It's 8 years was I signed my contract, so, you know.
So
and
now you're made it to the end of the road.
Sorry?
Now you made it to the end of the road, so people are watching it now, 8 years later.
Yes, of course, yes.
Yeah.
It's finished, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Sibi Shada is the director of Subira, and Subira was a short film first, and that won 15 awards in Screen in Cannes. And this is your first, so you have taken the short and made it into a feature. It's your first feature, and is Kenya's entry for Best International Film for the 2020 Academy Awards. Congratulations on that. So tell us a little bit about the film and kind of how you got, also I think it would be really interesting to know how we got from the short film to the feature film.
So for me, filmmaking is a very personal experience. I have to just go back a little bit into my
Sure.
childhood. I am from India, but now I live in Kenya via an arranged marriage. But at the age of 5 in India, I was sent to a boarding school. And I think that one incident was to impact me because I came from an Indian background where there were no rules, especially for the child. You can play around with your granny. We lived in a joint family, and suddenly I'm sent to a British boarding school in India where it's all about rules. And somehow I've always been in boarding schools, even for college and all that. So when I had my arranged marriage, there was a bit of a pressure from society. I actually come from a liberal family, but within that liberal family, the context surrounds you, you know? So then I married my husband. Last 23 years I've been in Kenya, but when I birthed my kids, I just realized how much control society has over you as a Indian woman. So I had my son first and then my daughter. And I just felt one day, it was such an awakening, I just couldn't do my life. I just felt that society had dictated me, conformity had dictated me. So I quit financial services, and each time I looked at art, if I'm driving in the car, whether it's sculpture or, you know, painting, I would just get very emotional. So I explored that. And what came to me was one day I just picked up a handycam, and the script was running in my mind, the visuals. And I just drove, you know, and did a 5-minute film called TikTok. And it just showed the Nairobi, we live in high fences, security, because it's a bit unsafe, and yet up country it was so free, and yet we look down upon, you know, the people. So that kind of contrast. Then I was just obsessed with film, because when I showed it in a cinema and I invited my friends, everybody was seeing my point of view. So I was able to get out of conformity and have my point of view being seen. So it was such a strong passion and urge that I wanted the whole world to see my point of view in order for me to heal. So then I did the short film. I'd get up at 4 a.m. and just write. The script was just pouring out of me, you know. And then that did very well. So it validated me that I can direct, you know. And then I started writing Subira, this feature film. I became a filmmaker because of the feature film, actually. So then I wrote, it's also an 8-year process for me. Yeah.
Thank you. Wow, that was awesome. And you still in Kenya? You still live in Kenya?
Yeah, I'm happily married. I have a son studying at UCSC at Santa Cruz. Yeah, he's 20, and I have a daughter who was applying to NYU for acting. She's very passionate, yeah.
Wow, okay, thank you. So, Chinoe, hi, my friend. Chinoe Chokwu is a screenwriter and director. Clemency is her second feature film, and it won the Sundance Film Festival Grand Jury Prize. That is the top prize. And her script was on a project that I do at the Athena Film Festival called the Athena List. And I remember reading that script, and I was just blown away. She has received the prestigious Princess Grace Award Film Graduate Scholarship and Princeton University's Hodder Fellowship. Wow, you are amazing. You're all amazing, but so tell us. No, actually not. I'm just. I've seen the script before it was made, so that is it's a crazy thing to see it. And then you won the award at Sundance, and the first woman of color, right? The first black woman to win that award at Sundance. So, so tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey and the film.
Well, hello everyone. Let's see. The only thing I've ever wanted to do was make films, and specifically screenwriting and directing. And there was no special moment that happened. There was no particular film. You know, I'm Nigerian, and I grew up in a very traditional Nigerian household in Fairbanks, Alaska. That, you know, that's another panel. But my parents moved back to Nigeria like a decade ago, but I grew up going back to Nigeria like almost every year. And so when we would go to, we have a house, we have a house in the village and we have a house in the city, but when we go to the village, we would all watch Coming to America. And we would watch it with everybody in the village. I don't know why. I don't know. And I've seen Coming to America like 35 times, and only in Nigeria. So those were, like, that was my movie-going experience. It wasn't Coming to America that made me want to be a filmmaker, but I'm just saying that, like, there was no moment. But I dreamt in scenes. I saw this moment. I just wanted to tell stories with images and sounds, and I love the written word. I really take a lot of pride in the words I put on the page, and I consider myself as much a screenwriter as I do a director, and they're two very different art forms that I am intentional about cultivating individually. And so I didn't really pursue it until end of undergrad, because I'm a child of Nigerian immigrants, and my parents are like, what is that? You're not a doctor, lawyer, engineer were my options. And I changed my major 7 times in undergrad because I just wasn't happy with it. And then finally, I changed it again without my parents knowing, like the day of the deadline to change things. And I changed it to English writing with a focus on screenwriting. I was like, okay, this is my compromise. I still don't think my parents know what my major was. And then I decided that I was going to go to film school. So I got my MFA at Temple University, and that is when I discovered something that would change my life forever, and that's teaching. And so I started teaching 3rd graders because I needed money. And to make my films, and then I fell in love with teaching. I will not teach below the college level, though. So after the 3rd graders, I'm like, I'm good. But I've been a college professor for over a decade, and that has helped me become a better filmmaker and kind of like expanded my capacity for joy and empathy. But yeah, so I basically, very long story, a little bit less long. I made my first feature at the tail end of graduate film school, not really knowing what I was doing, fully steeped in my own ego of filmmaking. And then it got rejected from every single film festival that you can imagine for like 7 months. And that was like the greatest experience for me as an artist, because it really forced me to be on a path of detaching from the ego of filmmaking and really go back to the reasons why I wanted to be a filmmaker, and make me really focus on the craft of it. And so I made a few more short films after that to really cultivate my skills as a storyteller and director, and that really prepared me for Clemency, which I had the idea for in 2011 when Troy Davis was executed in Georgia. He's a black man who was executed in Georgia, and hundreds of thousands of protesters around the world, including former wardens, were protesting against his execution. And I just had this question, you know, what must it be like for your livelihood to be tied to the taking of human life? You know, and I had never been in a prison before, or I didn't know the difference between a prison or a jail. I didn't know what a warden was. And so I just was obsessed with that question and the humanity of that question. And so in 2013 is when I committed to researching intensely, and it started with talking to a lot of people and wardens and lawyers and blah, 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 blah. But then I was living in New York City at the time, and I decided to move to Ohio. And I spent 3.5 years there teaching in prisons and volunteering on clemency cases, and really doing the work of advocacy that I felt was required to tell this kind of story. And so that is what really led me to Clemency, the film, and its focus, it's basically about a warden played by Alfre Woodard, who navigates a kind of psychological and emotional down spiral as she prepares to execute a man on death row who's played by Aldous Hodge, and they just give extraordinary performances, and it's been an amazing ride ever since.
And last but certainly not least, Petra Costa is the director of Edge of Democracy, and she's a Brazilian filmmaker, and she does fiction and nonfiction. And your first film, Elena, premiered at IDFA, which is the kind of biggest documentary film festival. And your second film, Olmo and the Seagull, was premiered at Locarno. And your film, Edge of Democracy, is about Brazilian democracy. And so all of us here know about the erosion of democracy. We're living it. And so talk a little bit about your film, and also what's interesting is yours is currently streaming, which is, I don't think anybody else's is yet. So Netflix purchased your film, and talk a little bit about that, and then we're gonna move into that with everybody else here.
Yes. Well, I have a similar story in the sense that I started also acting, and through my passion in theater, also started to write because I felt was never given roles that actually represented what I was living through as a young woman. And my first film, Elena, is very much born out of that, because I had played Ophelia from Hamlet and fell in love with the idea of creating an Ophelia that has Hamlet's questions. Because I feel Ophelia, whoever is familiar, is kind of the voice of truth inside Hamlet. She's the only one that questions authority kind of face to face, as well as Hamlet, but in a very poetic, lyrical way. And drowns in kind of the asphyxiation of the hypocrisy of the Kingdom of Denmark, I believe. And I was feeling the exact same way as I was coming of age in Brazil. I did not feel that I had a voice as a woman, as a young woman, didn't know how to put my voice forward, and started writing about that. And in doing that, I found my sister's diaries and mixed her diaries with mine. My sister had committed suicide 20 years before. And from that mixture of diaries was born my film, Elena. And it was one of the most uncanny feelings I've ever had in my life, because I was reading her diaries, and in reading them, I was feeling that not only had she the same questions as I had as a young woman, but also the same parents, the same family, the same upbringing. And it had been taboo to speak about her, as it usually is to speak about suicide. And it was very beautiful to make that film, because somehow she was 7 when she died. I was 7 when she died of suicide, and she was 20. And I started making that film when I was 27. And it felt empowering to be able to tell her story, which somehow society was trying to enforce that it be forgotten, and to bring her to life through that film. And it really, I fell in love with the power of cinema and in making that film, because it helped me voice what had been silenced. And I feel that's what I've been trying to do with my films ever since. My second film is about the journey of a woman in the 9 months of pregnancy. And it's insane that, like, even though we all come to life through a pregnant woman, in literature and in cinema, there are very few portrayals of what actually happens in a woman's mind during those 9 months. I was joking that one of the few is Rosemary's Baby. And I feel my film is kind of a Rosemary's, Alma and the Seagull is kind of a contemporary Rosemary's Baby, where it's like the pressures that society puts on a woman, and kind of the challenges and the dilemmas of feeling of pregnancy can be almost satanic in many ways. And it was made with 2 actors from the Théâtre du Soleil, and they're performing their own lives. And so in these 2 films, kind of the personal, I was exploring how the personal is political, I believe. And in 2016, I feel that equation kind of changed, and the political became personal to many of us all over the world. In Brazil particularly, that happened through the impeachment of our first female president, that was put into motion. And it was quite disconcerting, because no one knew what crime she had committed very clearly, though she was being impeached. And for me, it was an earthquake in all my values. I grew up believing that democracy was a given, that my parents had fought against the military dictatorship for 2 decades, and I grew up with the democracy. I'm the same age as Brazilian democracy. So I thought it was my birthright. And in seeing the impeachment of our first female president, then a huge corruption investigation that kind of put the entire democratic system of Brazil at stake. And then the imprisonment of Lula, who was our first worker president that took 40 million people out of misery in Brazil. And then the election of Bolsonaro, a far right-wing president who models himself in Trump, was really a shock. I did not think I would have to go through all this in my 36 years of age. And as I believe you also did not think. And there are many parallels with what happened in Brazil, so I encourage you to see the film. It is on Netflix. Netflix was interested in the film for many reasons. One of them is that Brazil is their second biggest market, and the film was first entitled Impeachment, actually.
Ah, and where did it premiere?
At Sundance.
Right, so it got bought out of Sundance.
No, it was bought before.
Before Sundance.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So you went into Sundance knowing that you had distribution of your film.
Yes.
That must feel good. I just also want to thank you guys for sharing those stories, because we never really get to hear about the people. And so thank you, and thank you for giving us the time to learn about everyone. So we're at a film festival, and for us programmers and other folks who watch these things, there's come September, everybody goes on this freaking crazy journey of awards season, which seems to envelop all of the brains of the people in the industry, but it also is a place where women are marginalized constantly. So I'm glad about this panel, but I think I'd like to dig into some of the realities that people have to deal with on the conversations about awards. So you come, I'd love to know, how many film festivals have you been in with your film? What was the trajectory from the premiere to now in terms of festivals, and your thought process as the filmmaker of, what this, the impact of this awards conversation? And I know it's all political, and there are certain things people can say and people can't say, but as much as possible, what does this trajectory mean? Any of you? Okay. Is that too much of a question? Okay. Maybe I'll have to. Okay. So, this is the things I think about all the time, which is how do we not have women's voices marginalized during award season, where so much money and press and things are in, people pay attention to it differently. So, you're all female creators. How do you approach it? I guess that's a simple answer. Please.
Yeah, so when it was announced in Kenya that Subira was the official selection, the very next day, there's Hollywood Reporter, there's Variety that wrote pieces. So it was so mind-boggling. How did they even hear of Subira? And they researched, and that was out. And then there were these PR companies that wrote to me, Then I went and met them, because I was coming to the festival anyway, and I preponed my trip. But there is so much to navigate, And I don't have a studio behind me, and I'm also the producer of Subira. And I just took a call because it seemed too complicated, And it's a small indie film, yeah? And I took a call that I only have so many resources and headspace. I'm also writing my second feature. And I took some space out, and I made a very clear decision that I'm going to work on my second feature and getting funding for that, rather than, because it's a lot to navigate as well. Who do you go with? And then they want you back for the screenings, for the interviews. It's too much, the trajectory.
Does Subira have distribution in the US?
Yes, it
Okay.
does, yeah. And we have a world sales agent. So and Netflix. We're in conversation with Netflix
Okay.
right now. So there's enough going on, you know.
Yeah.
And I thought I would rather, because what is at my heart is to be able to tell stories, you know.
Mm-hmm.
The award just happened, by the way, and I don't think that it is going to make it there because there are big directors there, you know, and there's some hot favorites. So I just took a call, very clear. I can sleep at night, and I'm really honored to represent Kenya, but I don't think it's going to go far.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you use it to get yourself, maybe it will help you get financing for your second film, right?
It will,
You-
definitely, yeah.
So
Exactly, don't you think? Yeah, thank you.
Yes. So talk a little bit. Your film premiered in Toronto, and now you're kind of like doing the thing. And when does it open?
November 1st.
Right, and you had distribution
Yeah.
before
focus.
you went to Toronto.
Yes, I did.
So less pressure, more pressure. Well, like thoughts?
Well, you know, I mean, I think releasing in the fall, there's a lot of pressure. And yeah, I mean, and doing a film about Harriet Tubman, there's a lot of pressure. So it's definitely has a profile. And I knew that going in. I knew when I took the meeting and Danielle and I started talking about doing the film, and I committed to doing the film, that it was going to incite a lot of conversation, and it would be, there'd be a certain amount of exposure, and that was intimidating. And so I'm writing that journey. I mean, I usually like to, being a black woman director,
Right.
I have to stay focused on the work.
Right.
I mean, I never think of awards. I just think about staying alive to fight another day, you know, like just being able to keep doing what I love to do. So this was, I've got to say, the first movie that I made with this much intention just for the audience. Like, I was like, I just want to do this for the audience. I want a wide audience. I want kids and grandmothers to see it. I want, you know, people to see a Harriet Tubman movie. Yeah.
Janelle?
Yeah, so clemency. We went into Sundance not with no distribution.
Right.
I mean, it took like 4.5, 5 years to make the film, and so my intention was I just want to make the film. Everything else, I didn't even see anything else. It was just like, we make the film. That's the first step. But I will say that after we found out we got into Sundance, then we have these conversations with like publicists and all of that strategy at Sundance. And I was very, very clear and blunt with the publicists, producers, everybody, that the way that I want to talk about this film is craft first, is story first. That this is not the protagonist is played by Alfre Woodard, but her narrative is not solely defined by her race and gender. My narrative as a director is not solely defined by race and gender. And so I was very, very specific about that. And I'm constantly having those conversations as well. So I will say, when it comes to marketing of the film, especially, you know, for women in general, for women of color, we're always asked to, I mean, most of the conversations with press is always usually about our gender, our race, and very little time is spent on craft. Very little time is spent on our humanities. And so I appreciate your initial question. The humanities of the characters involved. You know, a question I often get in Q&As is, well, why did you cast the warden as a black woman? And my response is, why not? Right. You know, because white maleness is normalized, black womanness is not. And so I will say I've been very intentional throughout this year. And I've been fortunate where I think that a lot of the press of the film has really been talking about the film. Mm-hmm. And even when I'm doing profiles or whatnot, I mean, it's talking about, I'm asked about research, I'm asked about the intersections of my teaching and my artistic practice and those kinds of questions. And so I'm thankful that that's been the trajectory so far.
And I think that mass incarceration and all that is really on people's minds
Yes.
now. So you're really entering into a conversation where you can talk about what's present in people's hearts and minds.
Exactly, and also like connect it to. I mean, there are other films, other great films that are really exploring incarceration, and whether they're fiction films or documentary films. And so it's my film is in conversation with so much other art. So it's great to talk about that.
Right. And Zabu, did you want to add anything?
I love so much what is said here. It's great to hear you. It's beautiful. And what I hear is that everybody's just talking about making a film, not about being a woman making a film. I mean, come on. I mean, this is not the point. The point is like we want to work and to show and to make stories, and it's very important. I was raised by a very feminist father. So, of course, I didn't see anything weird or wrong, and he was always telling me, you can do what you want. Mm-hmm. So I didn't realize how women had problems, and how it was, because for me it was easy.
Sucks when you figure that out.
I was just doing things. It was okay, and more, I felt it was difficult because people were saying, "Oh, you're a woman and you're doing this," and I was thinking, "Yeah, well, what about what I'm doing? Not who is doing it, but what?" And I just realized it because my daughter is in recruiting and she's fighting for recruiting women. She's working in tech in New York, and she says, "You've got to know this. This is difficult."
Yes.
And I just realized it, being really older, that how difficult it was, because it was hidden by my education. my parents were great, and then I just understood what my mom was saying and how hard it was for her, because she had to be a secretary. Her parents didn't want her to do any theater or anything. And she was always saying, "You're lucky." And I was thinking, what? No, I'm not lucky. I did my thing. No, I was lucky. I do understand, listening to everybody, that how difficult it is, and how I must always be aware that it's not easy at all. And it's crazy when you really think 2 minutes, and you stop 2 minutes and you think of what's happening and how we're just asking to be 50-50 or 80-20. Well, why not, you know?
You know, but I will also add that like it's a balance, because there are lived realities, right, with embodying our identities that we have to acknowledge. But but they're also but our gender consciousness and how it intersects with our racial consciousness and class consciousness shouldn't just like. We as women shouldn't just be the ones answering those questions, right? I'd be really interested in hearing from male directors and how they approach gender in their casting, in their writing process, in their filmmaking as well. And so it's a really complicated balance, but I think that we all should be engaging in these conversations.
Yes, you're definitely right.
And I think part of what's happening, yes, of course, is that, women have to carry the weight of the conversation, and women of color have to carry double the weight in these conversations. And so it's like, how do you peel back and use your privilege to have these conversations? And I think that is what the men in Hollywood really need to do, is figure out how to own their privilege, how to use their privilege. Some are doing it. Some are really thinking about how they can push forward inclusive voices, but a lot of them are not, and they give zero fucks about that, So Petra, and people who are not U.S. based, did you have funding from your countries to make your films at all? Because that's always an interesting conversation for us, because we have none.
Yeah, in my first film, Elena, yes, there's a law and a national film agency that allowed for us to receive funding
And this
to
one,
make the first
Edge of
film.
Democracy?
With Olmo and the Seagull, my second film, I got funding from Denmark.
Okay.
And with this film, I did not want funding
Yeah,
from
I
the
guess so.
Brazilian government, because
Yeah.
I wanted
That
to
makes sense.
be as neutral as completely neutral. But now the Brazilian government is actually destroying the National Film Agency. So we're in a very difficult moment in terms of film there. Yeah.
And Sippy, and did you get any funding from?
No, so the Kenya government is getting there, but we don't have a fund. I think they're setting up something in co-production. But I saved because my emotions were so heavy, so I just kept saving for 8 years. And but the Danes came on board. My co-producer is Danish, and so the Denmark government gave me some, and then my husband put in some. Yeah.
Good guy. And you?
We have an institution called the CNC, which is the cinema, and which is always quite working a lot. They gave me for the first movie, then Never Again, and which is a pity. You know, in CNC you have different commissions. C'est ça on dit? Commission is the word, right? And the first one is called First College. It's for first films, right? For first films you have about 60% women, I think, right? Wow. For second films, you have like, it goes down to like 15-20%. And it goes really, really down for films that are more than 10 million euros. 10 million euros you don't have, and above, you don't have any women directing. Yeah, it's a fantastic question. No?
I work very closely with your friends at 50/50 by 2020.
Yeah.
So pretty much every day, trying to change, getting festivals across the globe to sign pledges so that they would have more inclusion. And it's really used as a tool to get them to talk about gender when they all want to just run and hide. So I want to talk a little bit about if you've had any experience in, it's 2 years since we've had, the ground opened with Weinstein and Me Too and Time's Up started. And I was wondering if any of you have been affected in your work related with that, in your opportunities. Just any of you have any thoughts on kind of where we are as a film business now?
Well, for me, I was very happy when I saw the Me Too happening, and the story touched me personally because my sister was abused when she was 14 by her theater director in Brazil, who died last year, but is considered until this day one of the most respected theater directors in Brazil, and he did that consistently to many young women. And not only did he abuse her when she was 14, but after that she left the company, and he then told her, I curse you to be unhappy for the rest of your life.
Nice.
And I tried to denounce him, and they said that since the story had happened so long ago, I could be like myself then, prosecutor. I don't know what is the word? Yeah, for defaming
defamation.
him. Yeah. So, and I came to many actresses who I knew had been also abused by him, and none of them wanted to speak up. So I feel Brazil still has a long way to go in that sense.
Yeah.
I'm speaking for Elea. The movie Swallows of Kabul is dedicated to my dad, who gave his voice and to a woman called Se Ryonde. And this woman committed suicide. She was one of the set designers of the Swallows of Kabul. And Elea, the co-director, knew that she was abused by one of the very famous and big director of animation movie, and they have to prove again. It's very difficult because it's totally related to this horrible story, and they don't know how to begin with, and of course it could be a defamation thing. So it's everywhere. In animation, it's quite a lot. It's as well. It's everywhere, but there as well. Yeah.
Interesting. Anyone else want to comment on that?
mean, being older, you know, and having been in show business a really long time, there was just a very long period where it was just what happened, you know, and this is a very important time we're in, where we're finally calling out these people, you know. In my acting career, I mean, I can count the times I was pinned to the floor of hotel rooms and just, I mean, really bad stuff, you know, that I kind of brushed off, like, you know, and just went on because it was so prevalent. And I got to tell you, some of these guys that went down, you know, we knew those stories. We knew it was something that was kind of whispered about, and it's so shameful that we didn't speak up before, you know, or that we did, but kind of to each other, or you know, I don't want to work with that guy, you know. We could do that. I'm not gonna work with that guy. I'm not gonna go there. Or, you know, I don't like this person. But this is a very important time we're in where you can say, you know what, you know, and actually point a finger and say, you're going to jail. You know, it's very empowering when you think of the psychological damage that was done to your sister and so many women. It's a very good thing.
Absolutely. And I don't think it's ever going to go back. Like, I think people, I have multiple roles in this industry, and so people keep asking me, when is it going to stop? And I'm like, no, never. Never.
This is it.
I mean, this is now the new DNA. The DNA has shifted, and I think that people are still really trying to figure out how to negotiate it. It's just not easy by any stretch. But also, it's like, this is how do women step into it and use their voices and power in a new way and tell stories that had not been able to tell for a long time. You know, Harriet is a story, you know, the fact that we're only seeing the first film about Harriet Tubman, and I said yesterday, we've seen like 15 frickin' films on Winston Churchill. Like, no more. You know, we need more female stories. And we saw that great documentary on Betty Reed Soskin yesterday. I'm like, she should be a feature. I mean, like, just like I feel like there's opportunity there, and it's like, how do people embrace it? And I'm wondering if, you know, do you feel like you've had more opportunities since this has happened? What is it like for you as a filmmaker, pre, post, any of you?
Well, right after it, I was invited to become a part of the academy, a member of the academy. So I think
Right. So they've expanded, right?
unexpected. I thought only if I became a man and with white hair that would ever happen. Right?
When I first started doing this work, I could literally, in my head, keep the name of the women who were in the directing branch of the academy. That's how few there were. And now there's over 100 out of like 400, so it's almost 25%. I mean, still have an incredibly long way to go towards more women and more people of color, but they're really, and I think over the next several years, we will see the shift in the nominations because it's the branches that do the nominations, and if you have more inclusion in those branches, it's just gonna happen. And speaking of that, I don't know, you talk to a lot of reporters and people ask you questions, but somebody asked me recently that they felt that men in the film business are now saying that they're being discriminated against. And I mean, literally. But they want an answer. Like, they literally want to answer. So I'm wondering if anybody has ever asked you any of those questions and what your response was. I know what mine was, but...
What was your response?
Okay, so I said the opposite of inclusion is not discrimination. And that's just it. And, you know, people just try to be like... But I can't get a job, or this one says you can't get a job, and then the other answer is, but it wasn't your job in the beginning. You had to actually get the job. So now there are more people who have the opportunities to go for that job, but that doesn't mean you were expected to get that job. So there's like seriously, the problem is the expectations of people who worked in the industry who for years would just get job after job after job because there was no competition, are now like, oh, there are actually other people in the world. And I think this is also what's shifting under people's feet and making them, there's a lot of anxiety in the industry. I don't know if you guys sense that. But I sense it from all areas of it. It's like free-floating anxiety. On top of the free-floating anxiety of the fact that our democracy is dying, right? So it's just like everywhere. And how does it manifest itself in our storytelling is kind of like the thing I'm really interested in seeing what's gonna be like in the future and how we're gonna have more women's voices elevated. So, sorry, that was a little off track. But I want to get into a little bit of like what's like for you guys to work on the sets. Like, what are your sets like? Like, how do you deal with your department heads? I'm also interested, do women have more female department heads? Is that something that you really want to do? This is something that you say to your producers, I want a more inclusive set. Is that important to you? Any of you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the great thing about Harriet was produced by is produced by two women, and so that was it was incredible to be asked by women to direct to rewrite and direct a movie that was produced by women, and so it's a woman-run movie.
Right.
But I really loved having a first AD, for instance, that was a woman. And that, you know, it just felt really good. It felt really good. It's like, wow, a movie about a woman, starring this fabulous woman, and produced by these two women, and directed by a woman, and written by a woman is great. It's great. Thing.
And did you have more, kind of other department heads that were women?
Yeah, we had lots of department heads that were women, and I think we qualified for some. I read.
The Reframe.
Yes. But yeah, I was very proud of the mixture of people working on the film, that there was everybody. I mean, it felt very important for the Harriet Tubman story for there to be everybody together telling this story.
Of course. I mean, I think that's what people are striving for. People are striving for equality, equity. I mean, that is the goal because our world will be different. So any of you other thoughts on your sets and departments and things like that?
I've got a woman cameraman, but the light director is a man.
So it's a camera person. Right?
Camera.
Person.
Cameraman. She's not a cameraman.
Camera woman.
Camera person, yeah.
Yeah, of course. Sorry.
It's okay.
I'm French.
No, it's okay. It's okay. We all
in
do
French
it.
we say this. In French we say this. Sorry. No, it's not true. But in theater, there are very, very few light directors, women, very few. And I'm working with one. She's just wonderful. And the set director, it happened that she's a she. But I'm working. I just find that, and I don't know why, but it's usually half. And it's just like this. I don't know why. I don't know.
Like
I get along very well with the women in technique as well, and technicians, and plus because they had to fight a little bit more, to get there. They're really good.
Yeah.
So that's all. This is why, because they're really good.
Zippy, do you have any thoughts?
We were two producers, both female, two writers, both female, editor, one of them was female, wardrobe, catering. AD could have been. The first AD could have been. She was not available. I think Kenya has amazing crew, A-listers, We finished 2 days before, schedule,
2 days ahead of schedule?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And this is because of their expertise. Kenya is amazing. And, my co-producer, she works with some Hollywood films and big budget films. And she was like, oh, my God, it was so well oiled, no politics. We'd wake up at 4:30, quiet. Nobody's interested in banter. Work get finished. I was like the most jovial one, you know. No time for the director. Everyone's doing their own thing. And we finished 2 days before, you know. It was on a remote island, you know. So yeah, it's
did you
because
do?
of my crew.
Did you have a party for 2 days?
No, we were so tired. Just went
Slept
back
for
to
2 days.
Nairobi and
I think this is supposed to have Q&A, right? Is there anyone here who's going? Okay, so are there mics?
Can I just say one thing
Of
about the
course.
crew thing? Something that so my film was not made for tens of millions of dollars, and it was shot in LA, and it was a union production. I will say it was really, really hard finding people of color, women of color who could afford to get into the union and have access to the union so we could hire them. And so that's like a whole nother kind of
Yeah.
systemic problem that I hope that we continue to talk about as well. The unions and how do we get, like from the crew, like for crew positions, that there are some departments in particular that, I mean, they were not inclusive membership.
Right.
And so it was hard to really, and so we had to really like scour.
So it's prohibitively expensive for people to get
It's
into these
prohibitively
unions?
expensive to get in the unions, and also like, I mean, there's some, I don't know all of the details, but there are like some unions it's beyond cost. It's like
Right.
the hours and like, and then you have to get like endorsed by certain people, and it's like this kind of murky.
Yeah.
What was that?
Closed rosters. Like I shot in New York, and there wasn't a conversation. You
Yeah.
had to go down the list, and if
Wow.
you know you were working for the last 40 years, that's where the list started.
Yeah. And so that's another systemic issue.
So it's about people demanding different kinds of lists. I mean, that's also part of the issue is these lists,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But that's another one. That's another whole question. So how do we want to do this? Okay, great. Here we go. One more. We'll share the mics, and we'll get some audience questions. And I saw one hand right there first. Okay, so in the middle there. So I'm going to say something. Questions, not statements, please. And I reserve the right to move on. I use the moderators, right, if it's inappropriate. But I don't think anyone here will be inappropriate. This gentleman was first.
For those of you who are teachers, do you find time to do your own stuff?
How do you
Or
find
are
time?
Or does your classroom take up a lot of your time?
NYU grad film has been very good to me in terms of allowing me to take leaves to do my work. So the other side of that is that now, even though I've got a very lovely film that's releasing in the fall, I'm going to be teaching in January. It's my commitment. I have to go back to teach. And so when I'm not actively, prepping or shooting, I go back and teach at school. But they've been good. There's this catch-22 in academia. You have to produce work in order to keep your cred, right? And to, you have to. They expect you to work, and just with us filmmakers, it takes a long time to do that work. And so, there has to be some give with that.
Anyone else? Okay, where do we have right here? We have one, two. Oh, you wanted to answer. Oh,
Well, I was just going to say that the other kind of way that I've been, I need to get your kind of contract with NYU. Let me tell you, because because it's like I've had to leave places where they asked for like a 4-4 teaching load or like 3-4. I'm like, I can't do it. But one way is that one thing that I've been able to do that's helped me kind of balance the two is invite my students on set. Right. And have them like shadow or PA. I really include them in the process as well, and then that's been great.
Yeah, I once had my whole class on a mixed stage.
Yes, I love it. I know some of your former students. They rave about you.
Just one more quick question. Do you guys do your own location scouting, or do you have other people do that for you?
Directors generally location scout. It's very important. I mean, it's a very, very important part of the job. Even in television, it's one of the things when you bring a guest director on, that's part of your job is to location scout.
Right here.
due to the long hours, and obviously filmmaking is, there's a lot that goes into it. Do you ever, this goes for everybody on stage, do you feel like it's challenging at times to kind of balance your work and personal life? Because I think that's something that, because I'm also a young filmmaker, it's something I kind of worry about. I want to be able to still commit to my family and live a quote unquote, normal life. But obviously in the industry, there's a lot that goes into it. So my question is, how do you
That'll
balance
be a
that?
constant tension. That'll be a constant balancing act that you're going to have to do.
Right.
But it was really important to me when I began my career, because I was pregnant with my first child when I got my green light on my first movie, pregnant with my daughter when I got my green light on my second movie. It was very important to me to lead by example and say, you can do this. I mean, you absolutely can do it. It's uncomfortable at times and it's painful at times, and it does involve some balancing act. But now the great thing about more women working is, like we were talking about Mari and Heller, who's in her film, she was able to kind of say she was going to work French hours. And, because she has a family and she needed to be with them. And I think more and more we're going to be able to because when I was coming up, there was no way I could do that, I had to roll with those punches, and my family did as well. But with more women working, we'll be able to say, hey, and I have small children at home, so we're going to work these hours.
And more women in leadership and more women
Yep.
decision makers, more women studio heads, all that filters down.
Yeah, plus the fact that you're happy and you feel good makes always a very good person in the family. Anyway, you know what I mean? You're
So I am curious to know, for those of you who went to film school, how important was what you learned in film school? I have also fallen in love with teaching because I was inspired by one of my teachers going to community college, and I already have a BA degree before, so now I'm looking at master's programs and kind of going through the ups and downs of doing that. So how important was your master's in film to what you do now, and what important part did that play in leading you to become a teacher and an educator?
Whew, I've had this conversation with a lot of students and just people in general. I don't think that there's one answer. I think it really depends on your needs and where you're at. I went to graduate film school when I was 22, right after I graduated from undergrad, and part of it was because I didn't know how I was going to eat, so I was like, well, let me just have this buffer. But I learned, what I got out of it was, one, it introduced me to teaching. Having an MFA has allowed me to get better teaching jobs and to get a teaching job. So that's helped me kind of financially sustain myself as I was making films and building my career. But the other things that film school kind of did for me is that it taught me how to take feedback and critique. And that's really important as well. And it helped me in my storytelling skills. I will say that I really started cultivating the craft of filmmaking after I was a student. I started really learning the profession of filmmaking after I was a student. But the other flip side of that, I'm still paying off my student loans, and I don't recommend that to anybody. If you can get all paid for, then that's when I think you should seriously entertain it. But if you're going to have to write a $100,000 check, I think that you should reconsider yourself. I mean, but it all kind of depends. There's some people who learn a lot in film school. There's some people who don't learn anything in film school. It all really kind of depends. But then you also have to think about, are there gems that I can take from film school that aren't necessarily about the craft of directing? When I was in film school is when I got the Princess Grace Award, and the Princess Grace Foundation is the gift that just kept on giving for even to this day. And so I think it all kind of depends. But get it paid for if you go, please.
I wanted to know how difficult was the process of breaking into the industry and getting distribution for you all.
So I feel if your film is really good quality and you haven't compromised right from the script to casting, to editing, each and every process has to be excellent. They will look after you. My distributor came looking for me. in Kenya. It's a very, yeah. Netflix wrote to me, my world sales agent came looking for me, like that. So, yeah, how is it possible? Kenya is not a major film producing nation. So I think the key is you have to be absolutely involved in every detail so you can break through,
I think it depends because the distributors sometimes, I think less of the audience. They think the audience is kind of dumb, and I disagree with that. So, for example, with my first film, Elena, no one wanted to distribute it at first outside of Brazil. In Brazil, it was the most watched documentary in 2013. We tried to sell it to Netflix. They weren't really interested. Now that I got the distribution, that The Edge of Democracy is an original, they finally bought Elena, and it's been in top watched. So because it's a personal drama about an unknown person, they didn't necessarily think people would want to watch, but I think people are attracted to good stories. In that way, I agree with you, but the distributors sometimes don't know what the good stories are, and they're looking for the flashy characters and so I don't know. Sometimes it would be wonderful if there would be a Spotify or a platform of directors where directors could also curate their own movies, because sometimes it's just a matter of having the window and then people will watch it.
But festivals are very good windows. They're wonderful windows. This is the place where it could be, and it could help so much for somebody that hasn't got any distribution. You can find things really. It could be a very good opportunities.
There's no place on the path of filmmaking that's easy. And so for all the films that have distribution, there are a lot that don't. Absolutely. There's no place on the path to make a film that's easy. You have to, give your all the time. And for all the films that have distribution, there are a lot that go to festivals and don't get distribution. So, but that doesn't mean you're not a success. It's like, how do we redefine what success is? You made a movie. It was at a festival. Now with distribution changing so much, some people, film festivals are where their movies are seen. And not everybody's gonna get bought. So it's like the industry is shifting under our feet in so many different ways that you just have to keep on keeping on and believe in your storytelling. I mean, that's the key, right? If you don't have something to say, why are you in this business?
Yeah. But I think there's something very important that she's saying, which is that excellence is really, people respond to that. That's how you break through. You break through, and it's really important because now it's easier. There are ways to find an audience. You can kind of make something, go out to find some people that might be interested in it. But the way you really break through the noise is by trying to present something that is as good as it can possibly be. And because the industry is looking for the next great thing, right? They're looking for the next great thing. So you try and be the next great thing.
Okay, so we got one back there and then right in here after that.
Hello, this is a question for Petra. You were talking about the government dismantling the funding system for films in Brazil. Are you seeing already a change in terms of the kinds of films that are being produced and who is telling those stories now in Brazil?
Well, it's still in flux. We don't know exactly how and what will happen, but there have been statements where the president has said that he wants more evangelical films being made, and he wants, and there has been a lot of repression and censorship of anything on LGBT rights in Brazil. So recently, there were about 5 cultural productions that were censored because they had LGBT content. So that is the type of thing that is happening and is putting us all in quite a lot of shock. Yeah.
Okay, we have right here.
Hi. So I'm in pre-production. I'm directing my first like short film with like DP and editor and all that things. And I was just wondering that when you guys were producing your first films, how involved you were in production and post-production and like all the steps of it, and if you were ever worried about when you were like voicing your opinions about the more creative aspects about being too, I don't know, opinionated or mean about it.
Are you the director?
I'm directing it, yeah.
Well, if you're the director, you're intimately involved in every single part of it. I mean, that's what being the director is, and your voice should be the loudest. It's a it is a collaborative industry and it's a collaborative medium. But you're the director, you have to have the vision, and so especially when you turn to how involved you should be in pre-production and post. I mean, that's everything. That's where you're finding you're making your movie. In prep, you're making the perfect possible movie, right? And then production, you're actually making the movie, and then in post, you're reinventing and refinding and retooling the movie. And so you have to stay absolutely present. That's like, location scouting. I mean, that's what we do. Locations are movies. That's what we do. We have to choose every location. We have to choose every fabric, We have to choose what color the cars should be in the scene. We have to, it's mise en scène. It's like, it's what you're going to, everything that you do, what hill we're climbing up at what time of day, and to shoot that scene, that's every single thing is what you're involved in as a director.
Do you have a mentor that you've worked with? Somebody you can ask?
Yeah, I have like a teacher, but I'm just like wondering about the balance between like micromanaging my editor or like cinematographer too much, or like being able to have opinions on it.
What I do is that also the other person is, a creative, especially with the cinematographer, and I'll tell him, just let me do my shot first, and then you do yours, and we'll see who the editor chooses. So I let them do their creative stuff as well. You have to, because he may have something really brilliant. So, but I have so much energy, I need to do this, So I'll do my shot, and I say, all right, you can have your take,
And I'll also add that, like, standing in your power, especially as a woman, is a practice, right? So have compassion for yourself, but also try not to be afraid of your own voice and of your own opinions and your own power and your own worth, right? And there might be some days that you are like, oh man, I sounded a little pushy today or whatever. Forgive yourself, let it go, and move on to the next day, But I think it's like this constant kind of practice, but really stand in your power. And that's something that every day I have to continue to practice that. And even with Clemency, it was the biggest budget I've worked with, and there was just so many, people. And also, being a black woman, there was this, oh my God, am I gonna come across as this angry black woman? But then there comes a point, I don't give a damn, because it's my name on that, And so, at the end of the day, and so, there are gonna be some people who, can I curse? Yeah, there are gonna be some people who thought I was a bitch that day. But I think that as long as you have an intention of seeing and treating people with humanity, and with compassion, and that doesn't mean that you can't be direct. That doesn't mean that you can't stand in your power. Right. You could still see someone's humanity and respect them, but be very clear about your worth.
Right. And about what you said, and about the fact that you must be everywhere, because it's everywhere you. This first movie, this is an example I found so funny. I said to the assistant, so okay, the car is crossing the frame, right? The car is crossing the frame. So okay, it's there. Okay, action, and I see the car from left to right. I said to the assistant, what? But it's from right to left. He said, I didn't know. I don't. Because it's so deep that, of course, for me, it was from there to there, because they were coming back, and writing is this way. And I think, they come back, so it's this way. He said, yeah, but it could be this way. So, no, it can't. Actually, it can't. It has to be exactly you, that deep. Huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
And wear comfortable shoes.
Yes. Yes. And be warm.
I think that's about it. Do we want to do one more? Okay, one more. Who hasn't asked a question? Right over there.
Hi there. On the Me Too movement, what enabled that to happen was some courageous women with a lot of support, telling very personal, intimate stories in the media. We spent several months reading these in newspapers, magazines. We have a film megaphone. How do women filmmakers keep those stories in the popular consciousness through the medium of film? Obviously, Thelma and Louise is the standard bearer for the topic of sexual assault, and part of the success there was they managed to make it commercial and entertaining. Do you all think about how do we keep telling this story of sexual assault, and how do we utilize film to do it?
Okay, I had a couple of different questions there. So, if I understand this correct, you're saying that it's not the obligation of the filmmakers to continue to tell the stories. Some people might want to and some people might not, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So I think it's all of our obligations. I'm going to answer for you guys. I think it's all of our obligations to be constant in this issue and in this moment, and to believe women and support women and the men who have experienced that too, and to be vigilant and to continue moving this conversation forward and to not let it go back. There was one at Telluride called The Assistant that was in that kind of like Harvey office thing. There will be, I would say it'll be a couple of years and we'll see some stuff come out. But this is going to be ongoing. And now I feel like, firstly, I'm not a millennial, but the millennial women, they don't take shit from nobody. And so I'm just super excited about what we are going to see and what the future looks like. And I think that, these women have given us such great stories, really diverse stories, really inclusive stories, and I'm so impressed with all that you've done. And I wish you all the best of luck, and I know this whole audience does, so thank you.